Maybe you've heard it said that the greatest enemy is not the enemy, it is the inner me. That's a simple statement, but it's incredibly profound because the greatest threat that we all deal with is not an external threat, it's an internal threat. It's the threat of self-sabotage. What if I told you overcoming self-sabotage isn't just about strength, it's about a skill? And I want to show you what that skill is in this video. Stay tuned. Well, listen, one of the truths that I pulled from the pages of scripture, especially in the creation narrative in the book of Genesis, is this: Satan cannot make me do anything. He cannot destroy my life. He can influence me to make decisions that destroy myself. We call that self-sabotage. Even if you look at Satan's interaction with the first humans in the Garden of Eden, one of the things that you'll see is he suggested that they make decisions that were sabotaging decisions. He could not take the fruit from the tree and force the fruit down their mouth. He couldn't make them chew the fruit. He couldn't make them digest that fruit, but he simply suggested that they make a decision that ultimately ended up being self-sabotaging. And what he did in the garden back then is what he's doing in our lives right now, and that is attempting to influence us to make decisions that create self-sabotage. Now, this revelation, I really think, can cause a revolution in our life. It's really empowering for me. It's really encouraging for me. And I hope it's empowering and encouraging to you because it reveals to us how much power God's given us. God has given us, listen to this, response ability. Not just responsibility, but he's given us response ability. The enemy suggested, but Adam and Eve had to make a decision to respond. And they had the ability to respond in a way that was consistent with what Satan suggested, or to respond in a way that was ultimately going to be in their best interest. This is empowering. This is revolutionary. Because no matter what you're facing, no matter what temptations or suggestions you're wrestling with, I have the ability and you have the ability to respond. But here's the truth of the matter. All of us from time to time respond in ways to triggers and to stimuli and to suggestions that are not in our best interest. And if many of us are honest, we could say that even though we've dealt with some external opposition, maybe from some people, maybe from some places, but if we're honest, the truth of the matter is that the greatest hindrance to us being who God's called us to be and doing what God's called us to do in external opposition is internal. As I said earlier, sometimes the greatest enemy is the inner me. So the question becomes, how do I stop the cycle of self-sabotage? What do I do? Now, what ends up happening in many cases like this, people say that what you need is strength. And I'm not underemphasizing the importance of strength. But if your strength alone was enough to be who God's called you to be and do what God's called you to do, then the Bible wouldn't have told you and I to be strong in the Lord. If you and I, in and of ourselves, had the ability and the capacity to do everything God's called us to do and to become all that God's called us to become, if we had the capacity to do that, then the scriptures would not say God's able to do exceedingly and abundantly and above all you ask or think according to the power, not your power, the power that is at work in you. What I am saying is, without God's assistance, humans cannot be free of the cycle of self-sabotage. Why? Because there are sometimes we're engaging in self-sabotaging behavior and we don't even know it's self-sabotaging behavior. It's one thing to know it's not a right decision on the front end, but there are times, there are seasons, there are situations where we don't know a decision wasn't the right decision until we deal with the consequences of that decision. We thought it was the right choice, and we didn't. You take something as simple as relationship choices. I know there are times where people say, there are flags and there were signs that I missed, and generally speaking, that may be the case, but that is not always the case. You know why? Because people do change. And sometimes people enter into a marital covenant or a long-term relationship with someone that is actually a healthy, safe, current version of themselves. But when we talk about people changing, sometimes we make the assumption that when everybody changes, people change for the better. And that's just not true. Sometimes there is formation, and then other times there's deformation. There are times where people change for the worse. We go out through our scripture and see examples of this. Joab, who was one of David's confidants and comrades, didn't experience formation into something good. It was deformation into something bad. So you don't always know a bad decision is a bad decision when you're making it. Are there times when you know that's the case? Yes. But is that always the case? No. Because some trap doors in life look like regular doors. And you don't know it's a trap until you get on the other side of it. So if the answer is not just my strength, but also God's strength, this also means then that the answer to getting free of the cycle of self-sabotage is also skill. It's not just strength, it's skill, it's strategy. And so what I want to give you very quickly is the one skill I think you need to develop to break free from the cycle of self-sabotage. Does it mean that you will never make decisions again that won't harm you or adversely impact you? Of course not. It doesn't mean that. That would mean you're perfect. That means you're God. But there's a difference between dealing with something periodically and episodically than dealing with something consistent. That's a cycle. There's a difference between something being the exception versus something being the rule. And so here's the one trait, the one skill, the one intelligence that we need to increase to break the cycle of self-sabotage, and that is self-awareness. You decrease the likelihood of self-sabotage when you increase your self-awareness. And watch this. One of the ways you increase self-awareness is by simply asking yourself honest questions. And here's one question I heard a leader say years ago that I regularly ask myself, and I would encourage you to ask yourself before making decisions. And that is this: why am I doing this, really? Not why do I think I'm doing it, not why am I saying I'm doing it, but why am I doing this, really? And that question causes us to pause and engage in reflection. And sometimes that reflection gives us space to reconsider a decision we're about to make. Wisdom meets us in our period of reflection. So before I make a decision, and before you make a decision, here's my encouragement to you. Ask yourself this question: why am I doing this, really? And then, now do I still want to do it? Because wisdom is in your reflection, and your reflection is in your question. It's time to stop the cycle of self-sabotage today.